All right, let's get right into it. The material we're looking at today lays out what it calls an ironclad case for one of the biggest claims ever made in human history, the divinity of Jesus Christ. So we're going to break this down piece by piece and see exactly how they build that argument.
And it really all boils down to this one question, right? Who is Jesus of Nazareth? For 2,000 years, the identity of this man has been the source of endless debate, incredible devotion, and deep division. According to our sources, the Bible doesn't really leave that question up for grabs.
Now, the sources we're digging into, they don't present this as just one option among many. They lay it out like a legal case, almost a forensic argument with evidence from start to finish, all pointing to a single verdict. So let's walk through that case, just as it's presented.
Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. To build this case, the argument doesn't start where you might think, like in the New Testament with Jesus' birth. No, it starts hundreds of years earlier, way back in the Hebrew Scriptures.
And the first big piece of evidence they put on the table is prophecy. The whole argument here is that these ancient texts weren't just predicting some king or prophet, they were actually drawing up a detailed blueprint for a Messiah who was going to be way, way more than just a man.
And check this out. The key phrase here, according to the source, is mighty God. Now, you got to understand, in the Old Testament world, that wasn't just some fancy title. That was a name used for Yahweh, for God himself. So to say a child would be called that was an absolutely radical claim.
All right, the next piece of this prophetic puzzle moves from what the Messiah would be called to what he actually is. The claim here isn't just that he was predicted, but that he's always existed, like from before creation itself.
And this verse from Micah is basically Exhibit B in their case. The way the source texts see it, that phrase, from ancient days, doesn't just mean a long, long time ago. It's pointing to an eternal origin, something that could only belong to God.
So you can see how this is all starting to come together into what our sources call a prophetic blueprint. And this next part? It focuses on what they present as one of the most direct, most explosive connections between the God of the Old Testament and the claims of Jesus.
Okay, this is huge. Look at the direct line being drawn here. You've got Moses in Exodus asking God for his name, and the answer he gets is the sacred divine name, I am. Fast forward centuries later, and Jesus is standing there saying, before Abraham was, I am. The argument is that he's not just messing up his grammar. He is claiming the personal covenant name of God for himself. That is a massive statement.
Okay, so with that whole prophetic foundation laid, the case now jumps forward to the New Testament. The focus shifts to the testimony of Jesus himself, looking at what he said and what he did as the next layer of evidence.
And according to these sources, Jesus wasn't shy about it. He didn't just drop a few subtle hints here and there about who he was. He made these incredibly bold, direct claims that the people listening who knew their scriptures inside and out would have immediately understood as him claiming to be God. This right here is a perfect example. I and the Father are one. The argument is that he's not just saying they have the same goals. He's saying they share the same nature, the same very essence. And how do we know? Well, the source points to the crowd's reaction. They immediately grabbed stones to kill him for blasphemy. They knew exactly what he was claiming.
All right, so the next piece of evidence shifts from what Jesus said to what he did. You have to remember, in first-century Jewish theology, there was a crystal clear rule. Only God could forgive sins, period. It was not something a human could do.
And man, this quote just nails the point. The source uses the scribe's own shocked reaction to show just how serious this was. He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? They instantly recognized what he was doing. He was claiming a divine right. To them, it was an open and shut case of blasphemy.
So it wasn't just forgiving sins. The case then points to all the miracles. And these aren't presented as just, magic tricks. They're shown as demonstrations of a creator's power over his own creation. Calming a storm with just a word, multiplying food, raising people from the dead, these are framed as the actions of the one who made the laws of nature in the first place.
And all of this leads to the final exhibit, the one that the source material presents as the most crucial, the most decisive piece of evidence in the entire case, the resurrection.
So the argument here is that the resurrection was more than just the biggest miracle of them all. It was the divine verdict. It was like God the Father slamming the gavel down and publicly validating every single claim Jesus ever made about himself.
And this verse from Romans is really presented as the capstone of the whole argument. It directly links the resurrection to the public declaration of Jesus' identity as the Son of God. It's like the final seal on the case, stamped with divine power.
All right, so we've looked at the prophetic blueprint,
the personal claims he made, the divine things he did, and finally, the resurrection. Now, the source material pulls all of those threads together to give us its final conclusion.
And this chart really lays it all out, doesn't it? It's a quick summary of the 4 pillars we just walked through. The idea is that it's a cumulative case, from the Old Testament promising a mighty God, to Jesus showing up and claiming to be him, acting like him, and then having it all confirmed by the resurrection.
So after all that evidence, the argument shifts gears a bit. It moves from what's the evidence to so what? According to the source, if the verdict really is that Jesus is God, well then these 3 things, worship, trust, and obedience, are presented as the only logical and necessary response.
And here it is, the closing statement. The source wraps it up by saying that when you put it all together, the prophecies, the testimony, the miracles, and that final staggering fact of the empty tomb, the conclusion that Jesus is God becomes, in their view, totally irrefutable.
So there you have it. We've just walked through the evidence as it's laid out in the biblical texts. It starts with ancient predictions, moves to the incredible claims of Jesus himself, and ends with the ultimate claim of his resurrection. This explainer has laid out the case for you, and the final question that's left on the table is, what do you think is the weight of that evidence?